is the Aqua Sensory podcast. I'm your host, Jo Wilson. In this show, you will learn all about sensory harmony in water for babies and the early years. Because when we grow to love, connect and respect water, learning follows naturally. So today we are going to go back to the start with Aqua Sensory. I'm here today with Christian, the co-creator, by my side from the start. Christian, can you believe Aqua Sensory is now 10 years? So much has changed in our world. But let's go back when we created Aqua Sensory right from the start. Now, can you remember your perspective? Why did we set up Aqua Sensory?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. 10 years that has really flown, and yeah, the world needs Aqua Sensory more than ever, or certainly more awareness of our sensory needs. I mean, and that was the sort of reason we started, wasn't it? I remember watching a really quite moving film called The Moving Child, which essentially was talking about how when children don't have access to freedom and movement, it can slow their development. And it's not just movement in a linear way, it was all sorts of dynamic movement patterns as well. And how modern society means that we do move in very linear ways. You know, we're sat in seats from quite a young age, and we don't have this sort of access to open spaces like we do, and that can have quite a profound effect on our development. So yeah, that film was really sort of a bit groundbreaking for us, I know, at the time when we were looking at our swim lessons. And we just felt that although the film didn't touch on it, we felt that probably the one environment out of all environments where you actually do have access to complete freedom of movement was in the water. And for us, that was just like a game changer, wasn't it? We just felt that there isn't anything out there at the moment that can provide that type of freedom of movement in lessons. So yeah, it was quite a change for us. And yeah, looking at it now, it's as relevant today as it was as then. In fact, probably more.
And I remember that it almost like shone a spotlight on what we were seeing, we were observing with children's development. So it was an affirmation, wasn't it? Because we'd been seeing changes for a while, and then we were really curious, why were our children's development changing? And then that film sort of revealed it was because, you know, children weren't playing in the same way as we did as children. You know, sensory play is certainly decreased, but then the sensory issues and challenges, you know, were on the increase. So yeah, I really remember. And that was at a time as well where you were doing a lot of video analysis. And what was really nice is that we were then starting to sort of like take that into the pool. It was almost like the puzzle pictures were sort of coming together, really.
Yeah, I mean, we noticed straight away. I mean, my background was in swim analysis, so working with pro swimmers, looking at their stroke technique and adapting their swimming using underwater cameras, slowing down the footage and really having a look at the mechanics of stroke. And we thought it would be really interesting to see how children move in water as well through our lessons. And one of the things we noticed is that straight away, when children had more movement opportunities, so for example, if they were given a more softer hold in the water, or given a little bit more space to play and move around and explore the water itself as its own playground, they actually reacted to that by moving more, kicking legs more, and naturally discovering the water for themselves, rather than, you know, these kind of tight holds, these close holds that a lot of parents do in pools. So that was a big thing for us. And like you said, the play aspect was the real key thing, because what we felt, I always use a bit of an analogy that the swimming pool, it's a bit like a woodland. It's got everything it needs for children to play and explore. So they can swing from the branches, they can run through, the sort of the grass, and they can play, roll in the leaves, etc. So they've got that complete freedom of play. And what we don't want to do is come along, chop down all the trees, and build a swing, and say that now you've got a playground. Because what we've done is we've taken away all of those dynamic movement opportunities and put something in that's quite structured and static, that has almost an outcome to it. And I think one of the things we wanted to do at the very start is sort of make sure that play as a sort of a grounding principle of Aqua Sensory didn't have sort of set outcomes to it, because as soon as you start putting set outcomes in, you start to sort of control the sort of movement patterns in the water much more for sort of outcomes. So
yeah, I mean, that's to the traditional swim industry, isn't it? Obviously, skills, tick lists, really, really defined swim outcomes, even for early years children as well. And I remember, baby with a sort of tick list having to sort of dive under the water 360 rotation, and then that means this sort of badge and things. So we really started to sort of like question it, didn't we? And rather than putting in, as you say, structured skills, well, how can the child achieve almost like more, but through that at their own pace and natural development as well. And we created concepts, didn't we? Like one of the ones which we had so much synergy from your analysis was the fast, the slow, and the flow.
Yeah, we noticed that all children move at slightly different speeds in the water. They might move their hands quick, quite splashy. Some will be much slower and methodical with their movement patterns. And this actually goes through to adulthood as well. So when I used to teach a lot of athletes, a lot of pro swimmers, that you would naturally see that they had a swim type. So some would be quite methodical with their swim approach, much slower with their rhythm, and others would almost attack the water and need to sort of slow down their stroke a little bit. So it's all about what I call feel for the water. So it's how they feel the water, how they get that feedback from the water. And I think if you have a very structured lesson program with a set outcome, what you're in danger of doing is sort of isolating those children that actually have a slightly different feel for the water. They need to move a little bit slower in the water to get that feeling, that feedback. Or alternatively, if you're slowing lessons down way too much, you're not giving opportunity for those children that like something a little bit quicker, a little bit more dynamic and rhythmical. So sort of the fundamentals of Aqua Sensory is that allowance, that sort of child-centered approach where the child gets to choose at what pace they want to take their lesson. And I think that's sort of something that we try and champion as much as possible. And it isn't just about movement, it's also about language as well. And language is sort of multi-structured, isn't it? You've got body language, but you've also got sort of verbal language as well. So, we make sure that we're not using things like manipulation in the water, or using, parents often use words like, oh, they don't like that, or they don't like this, when they're using their language. So we always try and make sure that languages are very open for children, and not for us to determine whether they like something, don't like something, whether they should do this or do that. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you touched on a really important word there. It's allow, isn't it? What are we observing? What are the child's needs? How can we guide? How can we allow rather than teach? And then that is such a linear process where we are directing the adult, we're teaching, we're telling, and then we're not allowing. And then the little ones, they just don't have that freedom of expression and being able to have dynamic movement. So we're still as passionate as today as we were 10 years ago. I mean, how do you view the changes over the last 10 years and what's happening now in our aquatic world?
Yeah, I mean, it's so much different to how it was 10 years ago when we first presented the concept of Aqua Sensory, and we talked about sensory play in the water without sort of set outcomes. You could have heard a pin drop. It was something that people people were quite vocal about it at the time. They said that, you know, parents literally would not pay to play in the water. That was something that, you know, most people gave us that feedback on. They just couldn't see how that would be.
Or the importance of play.
All the importance of play. But now it seems to be almost underpinning most swim programs, which is fantastic to see. And, you know, the more that we can sort of see that throughout the swim industry, the better. So yeah, certainly it's so much better in terms of sensory awareness now, the importance of play, the importance of just allowing children to explore the water as a classroom of its own. As I always, you know, we often talk about this, I think we do have to be cautious in a sense that we don't then try and restructure the destructured classroom. So by that I mean that, you know, we have to be careful that programs don't take the sort of sensory opportunity and then try and create another sort of outcome structure behind that as well. And that's something we're always very cautious.
Do you mean about perhaps just overstimulating, putting just too much, sort of calling it sensory, but then just loading it up perhaps with sensory toys that flash, move, sprinkle?
Yeah, exactly. I mean that children don't need a lot in the water. They just need the freedom to move. You know, I always say that the most important thing you can take to the pool isn't a thing. It's almost a mindset. So it's mindset and the setting itself that's important. And by that I mean, if you go into the pool knowing that the environment itself is enough for a child, and we're just putting a few key toys in the pool just to help them explore different movement patterns, that's enough. But I think as soon as we start to forget that and we start to overload the pool with the latest fancy gadgets and toys, etc., we're moving away from the sort of the essence of what we're trying to achieve in the first place. And so that's what I'm saying, just a bit of a note of caution on that sometimes. And we don't mean it intentionally, it's just we can get a bit carried away with the whole thing. There's so many great things now for the pool out there, but what you've got to remember is that the most important thing of all is the pool itself.
Yeah, the water, definitely. And I mean, it's baby's first home, first toy. There are so many more things that we can be doing in the water. And I think that's just today's society, isn't it? We are always looking for more. We are on this little bit more of an automated rush, where stripping it back, less is more, is something that we were talking about, 10 years ago. And I think it is changing, definitely. And as you say, there is much more play with a purpose underpinning our swim programs. So there's definitely amazing changes out there. And we continue to grow and develop as well. We learn, develop, explore. That was our strapline 10 years ago, and actually it still is now. So, but I absolutely love what you said about your analogy about the woodland. And then I think that's really important, to value what is there, the beauty of the trees, but then to go into those little details, that mindfulness of, touching the bark and seeing the colour of each leaves, and really, enjoying the blossom, because it's all unique in every way. And often we do forget, don't we? We chop down the trees and, as you say, put up a swing. Whereas it's all there, isn't it? We do sometimes forget really that it's stripping back to a much more natural way of being, of flowing, of playing, of learning, really.
Yeah, there's no right and wrong to play. In fact, in many senses, that is what play is about. It's about exploring every single element of dynamic, going back to the woodland, when I used to climb trees and play like that, it was much different to a playground, because you knew which branch would bend too much, which branches were strong, and you'd make mistakes, you'd grab hold
take
of
risks.
Yeah, so it's that risk. And with the risk of comes the awareness and the sensory development that we're sort of missing out by taking away all that risk factor and making it so linear for a child. We often see with parents now, they don't even need to reach to extend their arm to grab a toy, the parent brings it directly to them. You know, they're lifted up onto a raft instead of making their own way up there and learning how to move or to crawl on their tummy. It's like we're basically, you know, they're almost on a conveyor belt for half an hour in water if we're not careful. So it's also about educating parents as well in our lessons to less is more in terms of their interventions, and that's the greatest outcome that their child can actually have, is that they have been able to experience the water on their own terms rather than
we can definitely, not realising it, take away a child's learning. I often say sort of then the child just puts on their swim brakes. It is about that lovely balance of how much support so the child feels comfortable and safe, ready to explore, but not too tight, you know, so they can't really. It is that just right balance. And as you say, you know, it's educating parents, empowering parents, because we often see children being sort of pushed and pulled around the pool, and we're going at our pace, aren't we, the adult's pace, and not the child's place, really. But bringing it all round, I mean, we are really talking about what we're really so passionate about, which is sensory harmony in water. That is where we're really focusing on that connection that the water brings.
Yeah, I mean, for Aqua Sensory, I remember when we first started, we did make all those sort of mistakes. I remember, you know, really going into quite a lot of detail for sort of theming lessons and getting all the equipment right, and, you know, that overloaded the pools with all sorts. You know, we're talking from
tried, tested,
we tried it all, but what we've ultimately come to the conclusion is that, you know, the more we can sort of strip that back and just allow that freedom of movement, that's always been, you know, the driver for us. But making it so that there is a really interesting and immersive environment for them as well. So we're just getting that balance right. You know, we do have some really nice equipment that we do use, but again, it's really just to make that environment just that little bit more interesting for them to explore and to reach out and
not
and
overtake
challenge.
really.
But
the environment is so important. Obviously the outside environment, but really what isn't talked about a lot is the inside environment. And from that, I mean from us, which, you know, always starts with us and then our parents and our children. We all have to, in order to learn and to be open for learning, to have a regulated nervous system. So we are feeling that connection, that harmony inside. Because, you know, maybe we can sort of talk about this in another podcast, but longer and much more in depth. But obviously the water does bring up different anxieties and fears. But, you know, focusing it on what the child really enjoys, optimizing their curiosity, looking for those windows of opportunities. It's, you know, you're bringing in an element of harmony and flow really, and seeking more presence. I think, again, that's something that isn't often talked about. You know, the more we're present in the water with our children, the more we're present as swim teachers, swim professionals, the more we're able to sort of tune in, see, hear, feel.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point as well, and it's something that we often overlook, is that out of all the environments, if you take a child's journey throughout the day and their parent-child relationship, when they get to the water, they can't be distracted. The parent cannot be distracted by technology, the phone, the computer, that email they have to send. You know, for half an hour they are fully focused and you know, in that present moment with their child, and that's really key for that child as well. They have that confidence and reassurance that, I mean, we call it a safe harbour, but if you to extend that sort of notion, they have the child there, they have the parent there to support them, and they have the child's full attention as well. So for a child, that feels very enriching, because whatever they do or explore or see in the water, they can get that instant feedback from the parent or
Yeah,
that
much
carer.
more connection, definitely.
And that can only be good for their development too. So it really is a wonderful environment for many reasons. And I think the future of the future of swimming, or the pool environment, will only grow in its importance as our outside environment becomes more and more sort of chaotic. That pool space is going to become much more
We
crucial.
are seeking much more connection. There's much more interconnectedness back to nature. And I think the water will be valued for that sense of connection. And we will be really seeking that in our world and come in to what I call home, really. Well, thanks, Christian. It's been great to talk. And you're always here by my side behind the scenes as a co-creator of Aqua Sensory, and people can also connect to your work as well, because you're so passionate, writing books, programs, supporting, mentoring people, as the Calibrate coach.
One of my big passions is about really sort of unlocking our true potential through mindset. I touched on it a bit there. Our latest book, Visualize, is the power of our imagination and how important that is, not just in children but also in adults as well. It's something that we often think is the stuff of childhood, our imagination, but it's so important to maintain a really good, strong imagination as we get older, because imagination fuels all sorts of things in terms of opportunity, self-confidence, self-worth. If we can visualize and share those sort of enriched ideas with our children and basically fill them with the sort of the confidence that imagination gives. Because the thing with imagination is it's kind of endless in terms of possibilities. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, and we try and bring it to the pool as much as we
maybe
can.
that's something else we can talk about, how we can bring more imagination and visualization into the pool. But thanks so much for tuning in today, and keep listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Aqua Sensory Way. It's so nice to have you here tuning in today. Let's connect again soon. I'd love you to find out more about creating sensory harmony in water. Come and join us on our socials and in our community Facebook group, Aqua Sensory Connections.